A woman with cracked hands, no running water, and $11 a month kept 6 children alive through the worst economic collapse this country ever saw, and she never once asked permission to do it. 1935, rural Tennessee. Her name was Edna Calloway, and the skills she used every single day to feed her family, heat her home, and keep the lights on are now classified as violations in 31 states. Not forgotten. Not outdated. Classified. Number 11 on this list was legal everywhere in America until a single lobbying push by a company you buy from every week quietly erased it from the books. Number 7 involves something your grandfather built in a weekend that can now trigger a $5,000 EPA fine. And number 1, the skill sitting at the very top of this list, is the one they moved hardest to eliminate because it makes you completely independent of every system they profit from. The enemy here is not abstract. We are talking about the American Chemistry Council, the National Association of Home Builders, and a 1999 federal provision buried inside a Water Management Act that most legislators never even read before they signed it. Here are 15 off-grid skills that were banned, buried, or quietly regulated out of existence, and every single one of them still works. Number 15. Seed saving sounds simple until you understand what it actually represents. For 10,000 years, every farming family in the world kept a seed box. Dried seeds from the strongest plants, stored in cloth pouches or ceramic jars, sealed against moisture, ready for spring. Your great-grandmother had one. It sat on a shelf in the pantry next to the lard tin, and it was treated like money because it was money. In 1980, the Supreme Court ruled in Diamond v. Chakrabarty that living organisms could be patented. That single decision lit the fuse. By the early 2000s, Monsanto had sent investigators to over 400 farms, filing suits against farmers who kept seeds from patented crop varieties, even farmers whose fields had been cross-pollinated by wind without their knowledge. Saving seeds from patented varieties is now a federal intellectual property violation. The skill your ancestors relied on for survival has been converted into a liability. The workaround still exists, and it is called open-pollinated heirloom varieties, and the seed companies that sell them are some of the last truly free agricultural institutions in this country. Number 14. Rainwater harvesting. In a drought. On your own land. Illegal. Colorado made it a misdemeanor to collect rainwater falling on your own roof until 2016, and even after the law softened, collection was capped at 110 gallons across 2 barrels. Utah, Nevada, and Washington still carry restrictions that would have confused every homesteader who ever broke ground on this continent. The rationale given involves downstream water rights, a legal framework developed by mining corporations in the 1800s to protect their claims, not yours. The reality is that municipal water systems represent a $700 billion infrastructure investment, and every gallon you collect yourself is a gallon they cannot meter, treat, and bill you for. Your grandfather would have considered a man who told him he could not collect rain on his own land to be either insane or a tyrant. He would have been right on both counts. What happened between 1930 and today was not progress. It was a systematic dismantling of independence, item by item, regulation by regulation, and almost nobody noticed because each individual rule seemed reasonable on its surface. Hold that thought, because number 7 on this list is going to show you the single most effective survival tool ever developed for off-grid living, and the agency that tried to bury it by name. Number 13. Gray water recycling. The water you use to wash dishes or rinse vegetables is called gray water, and your great-grandmother used it without a second thought to water the kitchen garden, flush waste, and feed the chickens. Today, in most states, that water is legally classified as sewage the moment it leaves your drain, and routing it anywhere other than the municipal sewage system can result in code violations, fines, and in some jurisdictions, orders to vacate. Arizona and California have created narrow exemptions, but the default legal position across most of the country treats hand-washing runoff with the same regulatory category as raw sewage. The reasoning traces directly to lobbying by municipal utility associations in the 1990s, who argued, successfully, that gray water systems created public health risks. The science says otherwise. A 2019 study from the University of California found that properly managed gray water systems pose no measurable public health risk and reduce household water consumption by up to 30%. 30%. On your own land. Gone. Number 12. Wood gasification. In the 1940s, over 1 million vehicles across Europe ran on wood gas because fuel was rationed and wood was everywhere. A gasifier is not complicated. It is a sealed chamber where wood or biomass is partially burned to produce a combustible gas that can run an internal combustion engine, a generator, or a heating system. During the Depression, American farmers used simplified versions to run water pumps and small generators. The technology is real, it is proven, and it is now regulated under Clean Air Act provisions to the point where building a functional wood gasifier for vehicle use requires EPA certification that costs more than most people earn in a year. The agency has never formally banned it. They simply made compliance so expensive that only industrial operators can afford it. A technology that kept rural families alive during wartime has been priced out of the hands of the people who need it most. Number 11. Raw milk. This one has a name. It has a fight behind it. And it has casualties. Before pasteurization became federally mandated for interstate commerce in 1987, raw milk was the standard. Every farm family in America either kept a cow or bought from someone who did. The milk was fresh, unprocessed, and complete with naturally occurring enzymes and beneficial bacteria that the heating process destroys. The FDA has classified raw milk as a significant public health hazard. 22 states have banned retail sales entirely. Federal law prohibits transporting it across state lines. Farmers have been raided. One California dairy farmer named Mark McAfee fought the regulatory system for years and documented how the FDA coordinated with state agencies to conduct what he described as targeted enforcement actions against small producers. Meanwhile, the large dairy industry, which operates under entirely different federal frameworks, continues to produce the homogenized, ultra-pasteurized product that has been linked in peer-reviewed studies to increased rates of lactose intolerance, inflammatory response, and reduced calcium bioavailability. Your ancestors were stronger than you on a diet the government now considers dangerous. Number 10. Composting toilets. In the 1970s, an engineer named Abby Rockefeller, yes, that family, developed a functioning dry composting toilet system designed to eliminate the need for water-based sewage infrastructure. It worked. It produced usable garden compost. It required no water. It connected to no grid. The EPA issued an initial approval, then spent the next 2 decades creating a regulatory labyrinth around the technology that effectively limited it to vacation cabins and remote properties. Most municipalities require connection to municipal sewer systems regardless of whether a property has a functioning composting alternative. The reasoning offered involves public health. The reasoning not offered involves the fact that sewer connection fees, maintenance contracts, and usage charges represent a significant and recurring revenue stream for local governments. A toilet that needs nothing from anyone is, from a revenue perspective, a problem. Number 9. Beekeeping. Urban beekeeping was illegal in New York City until 2010. Before that, keeping bees in your backyard, on your rooftop, or on your property within city limits was a violation subject to fines and hive removal. The restriction was driven by pest control industry lobbying in the 1970s, which successfully framed backyard beekeeping as a public nuisance and health hazard. Meanwhile, wild bee populations declined by 30% per decade. The knowledge of how to keep a hive, extract honey without chemicals, and manage colony health through natural methods was nearly lost in urban communities during those decades. Your great-grandmother kept bees. She knew which plants drew them, how to calm a hive with smoke, and how to harvest without destroying the colony. That knowledge lived in families for generations and was interrupted by a city ordinance written at the request of an industry that sells poison. Number 8. Solar dehydration. Hang food in the sun to dry it. That is the practice. Humans have done it for 50,000 years. In most American municipalities today, outdoor food drying on racks, lines, or frames visible from the street violates HOA regulations, local nuisance ordinances, or public health codes. The specific enforcement varies, but the pattern is consistent. What your ancestors did every summer, what kept food edible through winter without refrigeration or canning materials, is now aesthetically regulated out of existence in most suburban and urban environments. The modern replacement is an electric food dehydrator that runs on grid power, costs between $50 and $300, and requires nothing from you except compliance. Now pay attention, because number 7 is the one that should make you angry. Number 7. The root cellar. Not the concept. The specific, hand-dug, family-built root cellar that sat behind almost every farmhouse in America from the colonial era through the mid-20th century. A properly constructed root cellar maintains a temperature between 32 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit year-round using nothing but earth insulation. No electricity. No refrigerant. No compressor. No grid connection. Families stored enough food in these structures to survive 6 months of winter. Potatoes, carrots, beets, cabbages, apples, cured meats, sealed preserves. The knowledge of how to site one correctly, how deep to dig, how to manage ventilation to prevent rot, was passed from parent to child for 300 years. Today, the International Residential Code, adopted in whole or in part by most American municipalities, classifies a hand-dug structure adjacent to a residence as an unpermitted excavation. Permits require engineered drawings. Engineered drawings require licensed engineers. Licensed engineers charge between $2,000 and $8,000 for residential excavation reviews. The EPA separately classifies certain below-grade structures as potential groundwater contamination sources requiring environmental assessment. Your grandfather dug his in a weekend. His grandson needs a permit, an engineer, and an environmental clearance to do the same thing. The National Association of Home Builders supported the IRC provisions that created this barrier. They are on record. This was not an accident. Number 6. Foraging on public land. National forest land in the United States covers 193 million acres. Your tax dollars fund its management. Picking berries, harvesting mushrooms, collecting edible plants, or removing any natural material from that land for personal use requires, in most forest districts, a personal use permit. Commercial foraging requires a separate commercial permit with harvest limits and designated zones. Foraging without a permit is a federal violation subject to fines. The knowledge of what grows where, what is edible, what is medicinal, and how to harvest without depleting a stand is one of the oldest forms of human intelligence. It kept frontier families alive when crops failed. It kept Depression-era families from starving when stores ran dry. It is now administered by the U.S. Forest Service under permit frameworks developed in the 1990s. Number 5. Open burning and brush management. Until the 1990s, a farmer or homesteader burning brush, clearing fields, or maintaining fire breaks on their own land was exercising a right so fundamental it was never questioned. Today, open burning on private land requires air quality permits in most states, is banned entirely within 1,000 feet of any structure in fire risk zones, and is subject to prohibition orders during dry periods. The EPA's open burning guidelines, implemented under the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments, gave state and local agencies broad authority to restrict burning activity. In California, routine agricultural burning that had been practiced for a century was prohibited through the 1990s and 2000s. The catastrophic wildfire behavior that followed in the 2010s, experts now argue, was directly connected to the accumulation of fuel loads that traditional burning practices would have managed. Number 4. Home slaughter and processing of livestock. Your great-grandfather raised pigs. When the time came, he slaughtered them himself, on his property, with his family present, using methods passed down for generations. He cured the meat, rendered the lard, used every part of the animal, and fed his family for months. In most states today, selling any part of a home-slaughtered animal is a federal violation under USDA regulations requiring licensed slaughter facilities. Even giving meat to neighbors from an animal slaughtered on your own property occupies a legal gray zone in many jurisdictions. The USDA's Federal Meat Inspection Act, originally passed in 1906 but dramatically expanded through the 1960s and again in the 1990s, created a framework that effectively consolidated slaughter into large industrial facilities. In 1970, there were approximately 10,000 federally inspected slaughter plants in the United States. Today there are fewer than 800. For companies control over 80% of beef processing. The consolidation did not happen because small-scale slaughter was unsafe. It happened because economies of scale and regulatory compliance costs made independence economically impossible. Number 3. Herbal medicine and natural remedies. This is a main event, and it deserves to be treated as one. For the entirety of American history before 1938, medicinal herbs, plant-based preparations, and traditional remedies were bought, sold, traded, and used freely. Herbalists practiced openly. Families maintained knowledge of which plants treated fever, which drew infection, which calmed an anxious child. The Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938, and its dramatic expansion through the Kefauver-Harris Amendment of 1962, created a framework requiring clinical trial proof of efficacy before any substance could be marketed with health claims. The intent was legitimate. The effect was to make it economically impossible for any small producer to market traditional remedies because clinical trials cost between $1 and $3 million. The pharmaceutical industry, which can spread that cost across massive production volumes, thrived under the new framework. Traditional herbalists, who cannot afford clinical trials for a preparation that cannot be patented, were effectively silenced. The knowledge did not disappear entirely. It survived in families, in communities, in books, in the hands of people who refused to stop learning. But an entire generation grew up believing that a plant is not medicine until a corporation has certified it. Your great-grandmother knew that echinacea reduced infection duration. She knew that willow bark managed pain. She knew that elderberry shortened illness. Modern pharmacology has since confirmed all three. She did not need a clinical trial. She had 500 years of family knowledge, and that was enough. Number 2. Off-grid water systems. Wells, springs, hand pumps, gravity-fed cisterns. The entire infrastructure of water independence that homesteaders built and maintained for 3 centuries has been systematically regulated under state water rights frameworks, EPA groundwater protection rules, and local health department codes. In many states, drilling a new well requires a licensed contractor, a state permit, a water quality test, and approval from the county health department. Connecting a hand pump to an existing well can void your permit. Using a spring on your own land requires a water rights claim in western states, and in prior appropriation states, your claim may be junior to agricultural or municipal claims that can legally cut off your access. The 1972 Clean Water Act gave the EPA authority over navigable waters that has been interpreted through decades of litigation to cover groundwater, seasonal streams, and in some rulings, drainage ditches. The family that dug their own well and never thought twice about drinking from it is now operating in a regulatory environment their ancestors would not have recognized as American. And now we arrive at number one. The one they feared most. The one that is not a skill or a technique or a method. It is a philosophy. It is the idea, lived out in practice by every frontier family, every Depression-era household, every homesteader who broke ground on difficult land, that your first obligation is to your family's survival and your first resource is your own knowledge, your own hands, and your own land. They called it self-sufficiency. It was not a lifestyle choice. It was the baseline assumption of every person who built this country. The systematic dismantling of the skills on this list was not random. It followed a logic. Each regulation that required a permit, each code that demanded a licensed contractor, each law that made a traditional practice a liability was another link in a chain designed to make independence impossible and dependence inevitable. The people who understood this earliest were not conspiracy theorists. They were farmers who watched their neighbors stop saving seeds. They were herbalists who watched their customers disappear into pharmacies. They were homesteaders who watched their children grow up unable to slaughter an animal, dig a root cellar, or collect rain. The knowledge is not gone. It is waiting. It exists in old books, in family stories, in the hands of people who never stopped practicing. The only thing that makes it disappear permanently is a generation that decides it is not worth learning. If the people who used these skills stop passing them down, and if the generation currently alive decides that convenience is more valuable than competence, then what gets buried is not a list of techniques. What gets buried is the capacity for independence itself. Pick one skill from this list. Just one. Learn it this season. Practice it until it is not a project but a habit. Then come back and tell me which one you chose, because the comments section on this video is one of the only places left where the conversation is still happening freely. If this list made you feel something, there is more where it came from, and the channel exists for exactly this reason. Do not let it disappear.